Human populations have been increasing over the years. Here's Corbin with more information.
Act 1. Human population growth.
In primitive societies, families had many children, only about 2 of which survived to recruitment. This kept populations at replacement level until things like medicine, improvements in personal hygiene, and better nutrition drastically lowered infant mortality rates. The situation in developing nations today is that families have as many as 7 or 8 children, many of which survive. This has created exponential growth in population and increased poverty levels.
This is a graph of the human population explosion. As you can see, it was relatively stable up until around the 19th century. This is when many advances were made in medicine and vaccinations, leading to a sharp increase that is expected to level off around 10 billion people in the year 2200.
Rich and poor nations differ greatly in terms of growth. Developed countries have only 20% of the world's total population, yet they have 80% of the total wealth. Conversely,
Give me that mango! You don't tell me to eat food! Give me the blankets! I need warmth!
developing nations have 80% of the population and only 20% of the wealth to support them. Both situations cause a lot of problems for the environment. Developed nations destroy not only their own environments, but also the environments of developing nations that are rich in fuel. Developing nations are forced to exploit their environments to grow cash crops to make up for the extreme poverty.
One of the most specific environmental impacts of the population explosion in developing nations is that there is not enough land for all the families to support themselves. Land plots such as Africa and Asia are redivided to fit growing populations. But the plots are too small for anyone to succeed. In addition, because of the need to farm for cash crops, the forests are getting smaller and smaller. Trees are being cut faster than they can grow back, and the soil is being heavily eroded. Many people move to cities to get jobs. Their land can no longer support them. This leads to overcrowding and unsafe living conditions. People sometimes resort to illegal and dangerous activities, such as selling drugs, poaching wild animals for money, and prostitution. Some are even forced to leave their country to earn a living. All this leads to a degraded environment in developed nations.
In developing countries such as Africa, not many children survive to recruitment. The low life expectancy leads to a high percentage of the population being younger, as is shown by this population profile. The majority of the population is young because the families have many children, but the infant mortality rate is high, so there are not many individuals who survive to recruitment. This creates a pyramid shape because the amount of people in the older age groups declines. The population profile of more developed countries, such as Italy, have a more cylindrical shape because most of the children survive to recruitment and live on to old age because they are not as densely populated and they have better access to medicine. The US is currently transitioning to a cylindrical shape, but is still slightly larger towards the bottom. Speaking of the US population, here is a graph showing projections of our population over a 60-year period. As you can see, using the data available in 1989, the population was expected to level off at around 300 million people by the year 2030. However, what's interesting about this graph is that just 11 years later, in the year 2000, the fertility rate had changed enough that the projections skyrocketed, and the expected population for the year 2050 had gone from 300 million to 400 million people.
Section 2. Issues with population growth.
As humanity continues to progress into the future, so too will the approach we take towards development. And the modern day development is vastly dependent on globalization, which is the progress of international integration. As the economies of different countries become more intertwined, will the developed countries abuse the resources of the less developed countries, or will we work together to achieve these nations and help to establish their environments? The answer will come with time. However, with increased access to the new technology, developments of these nations is sure to be accelerated.
This new form of development is called social modernization, which is focused on development within these poor countries, particularly with women. Instead of development from the outside through loans from the development world, one important form of social modernization is education. If literacy rates could be improved in poor countries, information could be spread much faster, and if women could receive an education, they would be seen as more than just childbearers. Healthcare is also very important in the development of these countries. If they could have access to nutritious food and could improve their personal hygiene, diseases would not spread as quickly. In addition, practicing family planning, such as counseling to couples about pre- and postnatal care, and having access to contraceptives would greatly reduce the fertility rate. In order to reduce poverty, efforts to increase personal income through the establishment of a working cash economy are key to developing these nations. Microloans, which are small, short-term loans to people living in poverty, are also a great way to increase income. Lastly, people in the developing world must learn to correctly utilize their resources so as not to degrade their environments. If these steps are followed to develop these poor nations, poverty will be greatly reduced and the developing world will be in the right track for a sustainable future.
There are many distinguishing features of a developing country. One of these is they typically have an abundance of natural resources that developed countries such as America would want to purchase. This leads to a disproportionate distribution of wealth within a developing world, because only the sellers are receiving the payment and others grow even poorer when they're deprived of these resources. Another feature of a country that lacks development is that many people depend on farming for their income. Farmers grow cash crops to meet their current needs, but often deplete the soil of vital nutrients and can no longer use the land. Also, because farming requires so much labor, these families usually have many children, which leads to overpopulation and more poverty. Lastly, there are little to no education programs in developing nations, which leads to a lack of skilled workers, and a poor economy is the result.
Due to the cycle of poverty in the developing world, there has been an absence of development. Since these countries don't have enough money to deal with their day-to-day poverty crisis and build a sustainable future, they must choose to meet their current needs, which makes the cycle of poverty nearly inescapable. However, the developed world has tried to address these issues. They do this primarily through the World Bank, which lends money to developing nations at low rates so they can afford to build things that they need. Although some of the bank's initiatives were unsuccessful, there are several things they've done that have made great progress in the developing world. For instance, their loans have greatly improved the economies of many developing countries by helping to increase their gross national product. Also, the bank has made great social progress, as is shown by the increased literacy rate, increased percentage of the population with access to clean water and sewage facilities, as well as the decreased fertility rate in developing nations. However, there are also several initiatives by the World Bank that have made the situation worse. For example, the bank made loans assuming that the help they would provide would have such quick results that these countries could easily pay back the money. However, the progress was much slower in practice, and this created an even bigger debt crisis in the developing world. This also made it even harder for impoverished countries to focus on a sustainable future and made the gap between the rich and the poor even wider. In addition, the bank has spent large quantities of money on building things like coal-powered energy plants and hydroelectric dams in places where most citizens can't afford electricity. All these plans have done is tear down natural ecosystems, pollute the environment, and relocate citizens to less fertile areas where they can't even make a living farming. In response to this, the World Bank has tried to reform more recently to cause less damage to the global environment and help the developing world become more sustainable.
Factors influencing family size. Women in developing countries have many children for a variety of reasons. Although it takes more money and food to care for the children, as well as more work on the part of women, there are many factors that contribute to the large family size in developing nations. For instance, many women feel the need to have many children so they will be cared for in their old age, while developed nations have things like Social Security and nursing homes to care for their parents when they can no longer care for themselves. Children in poor countries are expected to care for their parents until death. Also, because of the high infant mortality, women in poverty typically have more children than they feel they need because some of them are likely to die before they reach recruitment. Another factor influencing large family size is the need for labor. Children in rich nations are seen as a liability to their parents, but in developing nations, more children means more free labor for families with farms. Since children don't usually receive an education in these countries, they are seen as more of an asset than a liability because they can spend time working instead of at school, and the parents don't have to worry about the cost of education. Subsequently, the limited opportunities for women also influence large family size in the developing world. Since education and career opportunities for women are not a priority, their main role is that of a childbearer. If women are educated and have career prospects, it forces them to wait longer to have children and have less since they have less time to care for them. Lastly, the availability of contraceptives greatly reduces fertility rates of developing nations. In conclusion, although large family sizes in the developing world cause increased poverty and overpopulation, there are many benefits of having many children that outweigh the consequences and lead to an overall increased fertility rate and larger family size in developing countries.
Section 3. Ethics on Population Control.
There are various ideas that people have for controlling the human population. For example, if developed nations were to help with the education of women, the fertility rate would be lowered, as we discussed earlier. Also, providing contraceptives can decrease the fertility rate because couples can practice family planning. Many believe that developed nations should stop giving aid to big families because it is rewarding couples that have too many children. An optimistic view of the inevitable overpopulation of the earth is that there will be a stronger workforce as well as more inventions and more people to help clean up the damage we've done to the environment. A negative view of this is that the unemployment will be much higher and the abuse of Earth's resources will be greatly increased. Since we don't know the carrying capacity of the Earth, the continued population growth is very dangerous. In conclusion, if we can educate the world on the consequences of population growth, we will have a better chance of declining our population to the sustainable level.
Thanks for your time.